All right, Saagar, what's on your radar?
Well, right now, there's a lot of rhetoric flying around about what is un-American, about norms, about Trump and his decision to continue contesting the election in the courts and more. And it's all rooted in patriotism and what is right, in the idea that others should behave like statesmen. And maybe there is even some truth to it. But part of the problem is that, as usual, the people pushing that message are themselves not only hypocritical, but pushing an equally dangerous and divisive message, which will only do much more to encourage polarization. As I sit here, there is a concerted effort pushed by the mainstream media and even the most prominent members of the progressive left to quote-unquote cancel or render unemployable or persona non grata every person who ever worked for the Trump administration. And if you think I'm making a mountain out of a molehill, let's really review how exactly widespread and involved this phenomenon is before we get to how obviously dangerous it is. Like all crazy liberal phenomenon, it begins where they all do, over on MSNBC with Chris Hayes, back on October 5th, tweeting, quote, "The most humane and reasonable way to deal with all these people, if we survive this, is some kind of Truth and Reconciliation Commission." Now, for those who are unfamiliar, Truth and Reconciliation is the name of the legal process that occurred in South Africa after the fall of the apartheid regime to punish the oppressors. No, I'm not joking. That is what Chris Hayes is analogizing here. Essentially, the prosecution and imprisonment of his political opponents. And it was quickly picked up across elite liberal circles, pushed by former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich and published in op-eds in these times, at the Philadelphia Inquirer, at Salon, and even over at the New Yorker, where, I kid you not, New Yorker correspondent Susan Glasser discussed it on a podcast with Alexander Vindman, the national security state ghoul who blew the whistle against Trump to protect the holy military aid to Ukraine during the impeachment scandal. If that is not dystopian, I don't know what else. But it got even worse after AOC, fresh off her many victories on Election Day, tweeted, quote, is anyone archiving these Trump sycophants from when they try to downplay or deny their complicity in the future? I foresee decent probability of many deleted tweets, writings, photos in the future. That's not ominous at all. And just like that, immediately something called the Trump Accountability Project popped up, run by a guy named Hari Savugin. Now, Hari has the perfect bio. He's the former national press secretary for the DNC, former senior spokesperson for the Obama campaign, and former top aide to Pete Buttigieg. Immediately, Savugin began not only publicizing his list of people who ever worked for Trump, but he started menacingly tweeting about how he and his organization, and presumably now his progressive and liberal media apparatus, will target any business that ends up hiring these people. Okay, so you get the idea. There's a literal elite liberal conspiracy to target anyone who worked for the Trump administration and essentially cancel them in professional society. All of this is completely insane. And if you move from your desire to move on from Trump, and if that's what you really want, and you want to turn down the temperature, I can assure you that this will only do the opposite, because it feeds into the worst caricatures of American politics that the stakes of an election is literally existential. Now look, if you thought you would be done forever if you got thrown out of office, would you not maybe want to do everything possible to hang on there? And what message do you think that this sends to the 71 million Americans who affirmatively voted for Trump in this election? It tells them not only their enacted will is illegitimate if it ascends to government, but they themselves are un-American according to this new regime. And it doesn't just undermine faith in the democratic process. It teaches them that the democratic process itself is futile in pursuing when your opponents will literally try to destroy you if you let it play out fairly and you end up losing. But let's say you do agree in principle that some people should be beyond the pale. I would say, I kind of agree with you. But it tells you everything you need to know that these so-called liberals and progressives are going after the Trump administration while they're sitting pretty with the very people who actually destroyed the promise of this country well over a decade ago. As Glenn Greenwald so aptly observed a few days ago, no matter what the liberal metric chosen is, the Bush-Cheney administration was far worse than the Trump administration. From Iraq, financial deregulation, tax cuts, trying to privatize Social Security, Katrina, so much more. You get the idea. It would seem pretty obvious. And yet, on March 5th, 2017, who did Chris Hayes have on his show? Jennifer Rubin and Bill Kristol on a dual panel, not a joke, to discuss conservatism and to discuss how Trump is uniquely bad. Do you all need a reminder of who Bill Kristol is? He's the man who on November 14th, 2016, unironically tweeted this, quote, "The war in Iraq was right and necessary and we won it." Yeah, that's real. And it's a position that Kristol maintains to this day. If we're going to have truth and reconciliation commissions, shouldn't people like that be on it? Shouldn't people like Steve Schmidt and Rick Wilson from the Lincoln Project be on it for pushing John McCain for president and edging America towards more wars? Or how about people like Tony Blinken and Susan Rice? Those are the people who drove us into bombing Libya, destroyed that country and its promise. Should they be put on a list? Well, they have been. They're on a list of people who might be Joe Biden's Secretary of State. Or how about people who push financial deregulation and bad trade deals with China and Mexico, like Joe Biden's frontrunner for Treasury Secretary, Lael Brainerd? Should she be on a list? You get the idea. The people in American politics who most deserve to be persona non grata are actually some of the most powerful people in Washington. You can dislike the Trump administration and even Trump himself, but the idea that he was worse than so many of the ruling class who got us to a point where he was elected in the first place is laughable and ridiculous, and it speaks to his real crime, which is sticking a middle finger in their face in the first place and revealing just how much of a farce their political and cultural agenda really is. In times like this, it's not time to make lists. It's time to listen to level-headed people who can empathize with those on the other side. So I will leave you with some wise words from the great Andrew Yang.
So you have to ask yourself, what has the Democratic Party been standing for in their minds? And in their minds, the Democratic Party, unfortunately, has taken on this role of the coastal urban elites who are more concerned about policing various cultural issues than improving their way of life. Yep. That has been declining for years. And so if you're in that situation, this to me is a fundamental problem for the Democratic Party, because if they don't figure this out, then this polarization and division will get worse, not better.
It's kind of incredible, Kristol, to see Chris Hayes talking about this when he has these literal, like, war criminal bashing people or war beating drum people on his own show, has cavorted with them after he made his career sticking up, so-called, to Bush, right? And I see this, Robert Reich and so many others. I mean, okay, Robert, you want to talk about Clinton administration and their record on labor? Like, you really want to do this?
Yeah.
But they don't want to. And I just think it's so dangerous, especially. What do we do our A block on today? About let's take down the temperature and let's understand this. And like I said, if you think you're going to get put on a list and you're never going to work again in the entire United States, you would probably want to have a coup.
So I'm going to dissent in this way. I would be pro-list if it was a much larger list. So if you're going to add, if you're going to have a list, like, let's do that. Let's do all of them.
Let's morally get consistent list.
Yes, let's do.
But we know that's not how a list works.
Let's get John Yoo on there. Let's get Bill Kristol on there. Let's get Jim Clapper on there. Like, let's go through it. Let's really go through it.
But those people never get put on.
Because, of course. Yeah. And where does it end? Like, Joe Biden, mass incarceration, beating the Iraq war drums, like, he could easily be on that, justifiably very much be on that list. And anyone who had anything to do with the Bush administration should rightfully be on that list as well. So if you're going to have that list and you're really going to clean house and have Truth and Reconciliation Commission, I am all in for that. Because, AOC's point, I actually agree with if it's applied consistently, which is that, look, you see someone like Miles Taylor, who was complicit in in my view, one of the worst policies and most cruel policies of the Trump administration, which was child separation. He was there carrying water on that policy, and then he wants to completely wash all of that away and be this moral dissenter. No, you don't get to pick and choose and suddenly be on the right side when you were complicit in some of the greatest harm done. But you can't just apply that selectively. So if we're only going to do the Trump administration, we're not going to look at the Obama administration and the fact that they had more deportations far more deportations
Clinton,
than Trump. If you're not going to do W, if you're not going to go back to Clinton, then
Iran-Contra, I could go all the way down.
Of course. Every single administration in modern history has committed atrocities that they should be deeply ashamed of and that they should be held accountable for. But if you're going to pick and choose, no, you can't do that. And here's my other piece is like, what's your goal? Because the goal isn't actually change. It's not actually to accomplish anything. The goal, as is usually often the case, and one of the biggest gripes that I have with liberals and with the way that some of the left use this, is like, virtue signaling. Like, I'm more anti-Trump than you. So congratulations, pat myself on the back. Let me get like more Twitter followers. Let me be able to use this for some grift going forward. It's much more about signaling culturally your moral righteousness than it is ultimately any political end. Look, here we are. Pandemic is, I mean, we just had more record hospitalizations. You know the death toll is going to come up.
It's going to start coming up.
Hopefully we're going to get a vaccine soon, but we are still very much in the thick of this thing. The economy, still complete mess, K-shaped recovery, like climate change. I mean, we have these massive issues facing our country, facing the world, and like, this is what you want to spend your time on? No.
I think it's very important because, again, how are you supposed to win anybody over if you're going to put them on lists and say that they were un-American? I'm not just talking about the people who worked here, because they represent 71 million people. I didn't say they represented them well. I think most of them are idiots.
Yeah.
And they didn't do a very good job. But it doesn't matter. Is if you are somebody who put your faith in the administration and then you see that by trying to enact your popular will, which legitimately won an election, that you are canceled, so to speak. How are you supposed to feel about the democratic process?
Yeah.
I mean, and same on the other side, no? I mean, if you're a Democrat and you don't feel as if you have any legitimacy in the process, then you're going to start to resort to much more violent means. This goes all, not just in democracy, in an economy, it's all interplayed. And I just think that this is the most dangerous thing you can possibly do. And to see elite liberals, I mean, this is pushed by Jake Tapper and Chris Hayes. I mean, very high-level people.
Tapper actually pushed back on this idea.
On this one, after he tweeted a little bit about how people should worry about their employment prospects and all that. I just think it's incredibly dangerous about this, and nobody is approaching it from a perspective of, look, 71 million people voted for Trump. There needs to be some form of legitimacy. And, you know, in order to win, like, wins need to be accepted, losses need to be accepted, and if you make it so that after somebody loses, like if you want them to leave office and accept the results of the election, trying to destroy everybody's political career will make it so, like, okay, screw the democratic process. That's not what you want.
Yeah.
You absolutely could. You want the opposite of that. And I just think this is so dangerous. And like you said, look, if we're going to apply the lists in principle, yeah, I mean, in principle, I'm totally down.
Yeah.
But we all know how it goes in practice, which is that the neoliberals are the ones who put their opponents on the list, and they're the ones who get to keep the list when the keepers of the list are the ones who belong on the list. Try and say that's success.
Yeah, make it, just put everybody on the list.
Yeah.
That I'm okay with it. Yeah, I mean, the one other thing I would say is I do think it's disgusting that's related to this, but not directly this. I do think it's disgusting the way that people cash in on their quote-unquote public service, and I would be all in for killing that ability all the way around. But again, it's got to be
K-Street ban
consistently applied.
That's right.
Next on Rising, Team Rising is with us to discuss whether Dems could possibly pull out a Senate majority. Of course, it is all on the state of Georgia. That's when Rising continues.